Hey there, and welcome to U Talk. It's a show where we connect with people across Canada and ask them about their stories, passions, and experiences. I'm your host, Ryan Funk. The Indigenous folks of Canada have a long and rich history and culture. Whether it is the First Peoples, Inuit, or Metis, they all have stories to tell and lessons we can all learn from. However, colonization, imperialism, and racism have devastated the Indigenous peoples of Turtle Island. The echoes of the past are still felt, and decisions made today are hurting Indigenous communities. In this episode of U Talk Feature, we'll take a look back on two stories focused on Indigenous awareness. The 94 94 campaign, learning about truth and reconciliation, and Raven, which is helping Indigenous communities gain access to legal services in cases in the Canadian court system. Let's get into it.
Well, fantastic. It's awesome to meet all of you and to learn more about these organizations and this social media campaign that's going on. How about we just start with what is Circles for Reconciliation, and then also, what is Reconciliation Thunder? So we'll start with Grace and Raymond, and then we'll go with you, Jimmy.
When the TRC came out with its initial report in June of 2015, the commissioners finished the preliminary report by saying that in the last paragraph that anyone who wants to do something about reconciliation, they don't have to wait till the final report comes out. And so I thought it was something that needed to be done. I was very moved by that call to action. And so I spent 9 months consulting Indigenous people. We've had far too much of action where we settlers have done things for or to Indigenous people instead of with Indigenous people. And so we started Circles after all this consultation for 9 months. We started with the premise that we would have a full and equal partnership. And we would have as our goal to build mutually respectful relationships. The commissioners say very early in the final report that as they went across the country, they heard all kinds of definitions of reconciliation, but they consider it to be creating and maintaining mutually respectful relationships. You can't do anything unless you respect each other. So that's what we tried to do. So those are the two pillars of our project. Partnership, equal partnership, with the goal of creating mutually respectful relationships. So our circles meet once a week for 10 weeks because it takes time to build relationships.
Reconciliation Thunder was initially started by me and my younger sister. And essentially what it comes down to is at one point in my life, I had to recognize that I needed to learn more about our history. And I was really curious about how the relationship between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples in this country had gotten so bad. There was a point where I didn't know much of anything. I didn't know what the Indian Act was. I've never heard of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. I was going fresh. And so over time, I began to learn and just ask the right questions, to study in school. And especially as I was going through my master's degree, really digging into taking courses on Indigenous economies, Indigenous economic development, and that type of thing. And I realized that there's a lot of people that have that same gap of knowledge, Indigenous and even non-Indigenous, but people like me who just didn't learn it as they were growing up. And so I started this organization. It's relatively new in terms of being launched. Like our website is coming out very soon, and essentially what this organization is it's taking Indigenous consulting and sort of flipping it on its head. It's a nonprofit. We're creating high quality resources that teach some of these important fundamentals: the Truth and Reconciliation, Royal Commission report on Aboriginal peoples, you know, the meaning of the Royal Proclamation of 1763, the treaty relationship, a lot of these foundational things. So just taking that and sort of turning it on its head, creating these high quality resources, but instead of charging for it, as you might see in other firms, it's something that we just give out for free to the public for the mass use and mass distribution. And the goal would be that it's funded by grants or donations, people that see the value and just support, and then we just continue to create more resources. So it's relatively new, and so the goal is to really target and educate leaders, those who want to learn more about what they can do, and to try to get involved in making Canada a better place. And so we're a good partnership with Circles, because Circles is the in-person, real relationships than the dialogue, whereas ours is just more the background information, so just for people who want to do the self-study and self-learning and that type of thing, and learning online and learning through social media campaigns and that kind of thing. So it's a good pairing.
And one of those things that came out is this new 94 in 94 campaign. So what can you tell me about this, and what is kind of the hopes to come out of this social media project?
It was actually one of our volunteers that came up with the idea, and so just to give credit where it's due, but basically what it is in terms of the hope is at the end of May of this year, when there was the initial discovery of the 215 unmarked graves in Kamloops, BC, there was a lot of people that were asking the question sincerely and genuinely, what can I do? Like, how can I help? What can I contribute? And a lot of people were not familiar with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's 94 calls to action. And so we recognize, just being in the space that we are, that here we are just years later, and a lot of people don't know what they are. And so this is sort of a good pairing of saying to people, look, if you want to help, the 94 calls to action is designed just for that. It's a great place to start. These are 94 calls that are meant for all people. A lot of people assume that the 94 calls are just for government, and especially if you've only read the first couple, because the first couple are directed to the government. But these are meant for all people in all segments of society, for everyone to have a chance to do something. And so the goal is that through this campaign that we teach people that, these 94 calls to action exist, and these are concrete ways that you can contribute towards reconciliation in Canada.
For myself, just seeing it, I was like, whoa, this is great, because I'm exactly in that boat. I had never read these 94 calls to action before. I knew they existed, but I just didn't know what they were. So this campaign is just a great way for everyday people to digest the information, because when you pull up a 20-page PDF and you're reading through them, you're like, oh, this is a little bit daunting. So I really like what is going on here.
Mm-hmm. The project also forced us to reflect on which calls to action Circles for Reconciliation is addressing. And we found that there are about 6 of the calls that we are directly addressing in the work that we do. And so it led us to reflect on that. And the main ones that our project focuses on are calls to action 45 and 46, which really deal with the creation and maintenance of respectful relationships. Former National Chief Perry Bellegarde said to business people, before you build anything, build a respectful relationship. And Mary Simon, the new Governor General, when she was appointed, one of the first things she said was, reconciliation is all about creating respectful relationships. It's just so basic and yet so essential.
So we can't go through all 94. It would take a long time. But what are some of the main components, you would say, and who would like to kind of tackle that?
And as I answer that, I want to just recognize and appreciate Larissa Blumenshine. She's one of our volunteers. She's the one that designed all of our graphics. And so really, really like all of that. So far, she's done 54. She's going to do all 94. And she's put them all together. And it's a great way for us to summarize. So in these calls to action, there are actually 22 different categories. And for 22 different segments of society. And so so I think that's a good way of starting at, instead of looking at 94, you can start to look back and see these 22 categories, and you can see that there's some that are meant for the business community, there's some that are meant for church groups, there's some that are meant for the business sector, it's all segments of society. And so I think that's really helpful, and it's also good to look at just the summaries of each call. But in terms of, if you want to look at repetition and some of the fundamentals, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, also known as UNDRIP, that is mentioned in quite a few of these calls to action. And so what the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples is, it's a declaration that was passed around about 2007. It was the result of years of work from Indigenous leaders from across the globe working together to set out the minimum standards for the survival, dignity, and well-being of Indigenous peoples worldwide. And former Senator Murray Sinclair has often referred to this document as a roadmap for reconciliation. And recently, I think it's important to clarify the distinction between the current UNDRIP bill in Canada and UNDRIP, because there's a lot of communication and discussion on that bill. But in terms of UNDRIP, we're talking specifically about that resolution. And it's a really good step forward for our people. And when you look at the 94 calls to action, it's referred to again and again. It's in call to action 92 for the business community. It's given as a framework for teaching and for training. When you look at the church parties to the settlement agreement, it's used as a framework for the education strategies for your congregation, and so on. So that it's one of the themes that is repeated a lot. Another thing is the treaty relationship. There's a lot of times when some of these calls to action, they'll have a lot of subpoints. It's important to recognize the treaty relationship that Canada entered into treaty relationship after Confederation, known as the number treaties. There's also Confederation treaties, and recognizing what that nation-to-nationship agreement means. It's in there. It's in these 94 calls to action, and a number of other themes, anti-racism, and really just a lot of it is education, and a lot of it is action, and it's I'm trying to give you a summary here without telling you it's all in here. But the thing is, they're 94. They're meant to simplify, but there actually is quite a bit of work that went into it. Justice Sinclair, at the time, he also was part of the Aboriginal Justice Inquiry, which gave us 231 recommendations, and so these 94 calls to action draw from that, and there's over 4,000 pages in the final report that are summarized in these 94 calls. So it's really a starting point. I think a good thing to say is that these are not 94 things. There's not a list of 94 that says once you check off all these things, then we're done reconciliation. It's solving the problem of reconciliation is so big and complex. Where do we even start? And so I think that's a good way to look at these 94 calls. Whenever
it comes to like social movements, social improvements, just that progressive ideology, that there's never a point where things are just, oh, we're good. Let's stop here. It's all about developing and growing. So yeah, like you mentioned, going through these 94. Oh, awesome. These are great. Well, now what are the next steps? Always moving forward. And unfortunately, when there is any social movement or development, there is some pushback on things, as we've seen with the here in Winnipeg, when the statue of the Queen was pulled down just the division that was caused. Maybe more people are, on the side of Indigenous communities than against, but it's very polarizing, at least on social media. Following up with that, what can we do as communities? A lot of these things, not just for government, not just for business, but us as individuals. What are some of the best things we can do on an individual basis to grow these communities together of both Indigenous and non-Indigenous?
First of all, it's important to note these are calls to action. These are not recommendations. And the commissioners make this point. It's an action they want, not just we recommend that something be done and the recommendation sits on a shelf. These are calls to action. So let me give you one example of how we've taken this call to action about education. One of the calls to action asks for the parents of children to be involved in the education of their children. So we're starting circles. We have a partnership with 2 large school divisions in Winnipeg, and we're going to be offering circles in September in these school divisions where the parents will come to the school in the evening to take part in a 10-week circle. So here you have 10 people, 5 Indigenous, 5 non-Indigenous from a given school, and these parents will now be able to go home and talk to their kids about what they're learning in school about reconciliation, and the parents will be involved in the education of their children, which is explicitly one of the calls to action of the commission.
Like you mentioned before, Raymond, the project has seen an increase in people wanting to participate, which is great to see. People wanting to learn and take part and address issues within our systems to make a better society for everyone. So it's 10 weeks. Grace, do you want to maybe tell us what these circles look like and what that 10-week program all encompasses?
We usually have a total of 12 people in the circle. We've been doing them on Zoom because we haven't been able to do in-person circles. So we have 1 Indigenous, 1 non-Indigenous facilitator, and we try and balance with 5 Indigenous, non-Indigenous people in the circle. We have 15 themes that are listed in our Facebook page, but we usually only use 10 of those themes because it's only 10 weeks. So we usually start off with, of course, like at the beginning of the circle, after everybody has introduced themselves and where they're from and why they are in the circle, is we usually start off with the land acknowledgement, the 7 teachings of the Anishinaabe. We offer smudging if it's in person. And then they also do smudging in their own areas in Zoom. I always make sure that I do smudge prior to a Zoom circle. And then we have use a talking stick if we are in person. But as you know, everything has to be done on Zoom, and we want to make sure everybody has a chance to speak. So we usually use the we just number everybody in those circles so that they have a chance to speak. And of course, it's only an hour and a half, but on occasion, if somebody doesn't talk a lot or has not much, doesn't really contribute a lot because they're too busy listening, sometimes when they do have something to say, we make sure that that person has that time to say what's on their mind. So it's usually, and it usually takes about by the fifth circle is when people start getting comfortable with each other. It takes a while to start getting to know and feel safe in that circle, which we always make sure as facilitators that we tell them that it's a safe place to say what's on their mind, because we want to make sure that we understand where we are coming from, like both the Indigenous and the non-Indigenous side. So then after we cover those themes, then the 10th week, then we usually just close off as, well, maybe about the 7th or 8th or 9th session, we ask the circle what they would prefer, because sometimes they want to cover different themes than what's suggested on the list. So then we have time to talk about those. And then at the end of that, then we just close off with the visions of the truth and reconciliation.
What is the best way to kind of move forward? If we do all these 94 calls to action, what would the next steps be, or any thoughts on that? I'm just curious. What does that complete unity look like? Because we don't have that right now.
The best call to action, like I have a list of numbers like 1 to 94 on my choices, and the one I have that Jimmy just posted today was, we call upon all levels of government to educate public servants on the history of Aboriginal peoples. So I think that's really important, and I think that that is one call to action that I'm going to be working on for sure. But on the other hand, when I look at when it says levels of government to educate public servants, it doesn't only have to be public servants, like Jimmy said. It can be any organization. But the problem, I shouldn't say problem. What reconciliation looks like to me is that, yeah, we can have the 5 Indigenous, 5 non-Indigenous, we can have all these circles, but until the leaders, Indigenous leaders in those communities, reconcile with their own communities, is the healing going to even start more, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that the reconciliation needs to start in the communities before it even branches out into the non-Indigenous environment or communities or whatever.
I also think that sometimes, like when we talk about reconciliation, it's very huge and it's very complex, because some of the challenge up to this point is for people have difficulty realizing how the historical context, it shapes where we are today. A lot of people try to disregard history, the generations that passed, but it's all part of the same story, from contact until now. And so, we talk about the Royal Proclamation of 1763, for example. I mean, it's foundational. It's older than Canada, and it is really a guiding post for Indigenous and non-Indigenous relations from that point forward. And so, I mean, I'm referencing to it, and I don't think we have time to get too much into what it is. It's a unilateral proclamation that later had to be ratified by a treaty the next year in 1764. The point that I'm trying to make is, though, I mean, to your question, you're asking, so if we get all these 94 done, then what's the next step? So I think it's important to note that some of these calls can be done, quickly in short order. Some of them maybe 1 to 5 years. Some of them can be decades. Some of them are written that we can be working on this for a long time. A good quote from Murray Sinclair that I like is that if it took us, 150 years to get here, then it might take us 150 more. I think he might have said if it took 7 generations, it might take 7 generations more. It's just to recognize the scope of the problem. It's very big, and so, but still, it does, in terms of understanding, that's still a difficult question though. Like, people want to know, so what does reconciliation look like when it's done? And so the most helpful explanation that I could probably give to that is, let's start by imagining a world where reconciliation wasn't needed. So imagine that we went about this the right way from the very beginning. So imagine that all the treaties, the pre-Confederation treaties, were met, they're respected and remembered, annually visited. Imagine that when Canada was making treaties, they did it in the exact same way that they were making agreements with the colonies. So when the colonies and the provinces were joining Confederation, they did it in a way that respected the individual culture and the language of those groups. And so their self-determination was preserved. So imagine we did the same thing with the treaties. I also imagine that, there was no Indian Act, so there was no unilateral policy of individual assimilation. So that would mean that there would be no residential schools, there would be no peasant farming policy, there would be no policies against practicing your culture, there'd be no policies against having lawyers, and basically Indigenous economies would continue to grow in their own way. So culture doesn't remain in a vacuum, culture shifts and grows. So look, for example, at South Korea, for example, they're still their distinct culture, but they're not the way that they were 200 years ago. So they shifted and they grew with time. So imagine that something like that happened with Indigenous peoples here. And so imagine that with the Métis people, that Canada, made agreements and purchased land from them rather than from the Hudson's Bay Company. Imagine that the Inuit people were not forcibly relocated and had their culture taken from them. So all these different things, right? So if you imagine all these things, so then there wouldn't be a huge amount of Indigenous people incarcerated. There wouldn't be a residential school legacy. There wouldn't be intergenerational trauma. There wouldn't be a high degree of Indigenous people in child welfare. There wouldn't be huge disparities of just the social determinants of health between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples. All these different things would be gone because we would have done it right the first time. And so when we start to imagine a world that looks like that, where reconciliation is not needed, then that helps us to recognize that. So reconciliation will start to be done when the world that we see today starts to look a little bit more like that type of a world.
Please stop me if I'm wrong, but my thoughts on this, and I am new to learning about Indigenous cultures and communities, had no interactions with Indigenous or First Nations individuals really before. But what I've been learning from just the culture and especially the 7 sacred laws, I don't know, they kind of speak to me, not in a spiritual level, but just in the aspects of what we can see in life and just go through life and just acknowledging the world around us. I would love to see a much more combined aspect of society of Indigenous culture and Western. Like, I mean, there's pros and cons to everything, but I think a more unified, and since Canada is so multicultural, we should be taking aspects of all of this to apply to society. And I feel in terms of multiculturalism, our Indigenous communities are often left out of the equation, unfortunately.
And this is, I think that's a good thing for Grace to speak to here, because when we talk about the 7 sacred teachings, it's an aspect of Indigenous law. And I think it's important to create a distinction between Indigenous law and what's called Aboriginal law, because Aboriginal law, that's a branch of Canadian government that deals with Aboriginal peoples, right? And so, but with Indigenous law, that's our law. That's the law that's been governing our societies and our different nations on Turtle Island since time immemorial. And so, the 7 sacred teachings, like, that's a component of that. But law is it's something that has been guiding us for centuries. And the justice is that we have, that we understand, is very restorative and it's holistic, and it respects all of nature. And so if we were to, like I said, if I was to go back and look at how Canada would look today, it'd be, in terms of how we understand law, I think that Canada would be in a much better place. Now, I don't know if Grace, if you can speak further to that, because you have a bit of a background in that.
I think we shouldn't forget that reconciliation is a process more than an end goal. And I think we have to take a long-term or a long view of history. It's only in the last part of the 20th century that we have focused so much on human rights. We used to let nations treat their people the way they wanted, and we would never interfere with another nation. Now, a nation that is persecuting its own people is called to account by the rest of the countries of the world. We're not always effective in doing it, but we're addressing the issue that everybody has a right to a decent life and to respect and dignity. And that wasn't the case 100 years ago. So, and we're very impatient. At the same time, we have reason to be because of the tremendous injustices. But there's a sociological term called a revolution of rising expectations. And what it refers to is, once people begin to realize they have a right to respect then they demand it. And so when you get more demonstrations or more demands, that doesn't mean we're going backwards. It means that finally we're realizing the injustices and we're impatient to make sure that we follow through.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
if I'm grappling with is what really worries me today is about the tendency we have to put down absolutely every organization. And in a sense, we have a right to do so and an obligation to do so, because the moral authority of virtually every organization is being questioned today. Who is satisfied with the way government is behaving? Who is satisfied with the way churches are behaving? Who is satisfied the way professional sports is behaving? You know, there's hardly a moral compass that draws us in and we can turn to and say, lead us to better reconciliation. So I think we have to be less critical of the mistakes that we all make and look at the good things that we're doing in terms of promoting reconciliation so we can really move forward. I'm inspired every day by what we hear in our circles from people who really want to have a better world.
My hope to see, definitely in Indigenous communities, we need to provide access to resources, clean drinking water, all these things that are considered human rights by the UN, like shelter, water. We need to provide those. And Canada is a wealthy country. We have the resources to do so. We just need to do it. And I would love to see that once everyone has, equal access to education, resources, then we can start moving forward in a positive way. And at least in my opinion, I see for those who are reluctant to acknowledge these problems and the systemic racism within Western society. I mean, that racism is an issue worldwide, but at least here in Canada, that when you criticize a government or an institution, they take it as a criticism on themselves. I feel sometimes, which shouldn't necessarily be the case, whereas the actions of a government is, different than the actions of an individual. That's just my thoughts.
I just really want to agree with the theme of being solution focused, and I think there's a good differentiation between cancel culture and just accountability, so I think we have to have a healthy look on that, a solutions focused look on that, and how we can make things better, and so I agree, sometimes differentiating the actions of individuals versus the government can be difficult sometimes, but I just echoing Raymond's sentiment, I think it's important. I know things, let's be solution focused. Let's focus on where we agree, because I think that's when we start to get movement, is when we focus on those.
At the end of the day, everyone wants people to, be happy and healthy. It just sometimes takes a little bit to break down some of those culture or systemic barriers that's been set up.
It's so true. I think a lot of it too is information gaps, I think for so many generations, just not recognizing how we got to where we are. It's so important. You were talking about how there's money and resources to meet people's needs. It's absolutely true. I have a master's degree in business administration, and one thing that I think is interesting as I look at the Indian Act and different policies, instead of, as I mentioned earlier, when Canada was making agreements with the colonies and the provinces, there was an agreement for self-determination and the division of powers. That's why we have federalism in our government. But with Indigenous groups, it was, it was assimilation as individuals. You can join Canada, but as individuals, not as nations. And so their economies were stifled. There was the pass system, the permit system, and all these different things. I would recommend people to check out. There's a really good book called The 21 Things You Didn't Know About the Indian Act by Bob Joseph, and just really look at how the Indian Act has stifled one specific economy, which otherwise would have been self-determining and self-supporting. And then you turn around and you point at them for, you know, these misinformation, such as these myths that we collect their tax dollars, you know. So at the end of the day, just looking at that was a cost to everyone, you know, just diminishing Indigenous people's self-determination. That's a huge cost. That's we would all be better off if we had the ability to have our economies grow strong and to contribute, you know, the way that we would naturally would have otherwise, you know. So it's, again, when we look at solution focused, like, it's when Indigenous people win, we all win together, you know.
Exactly. Between Circles of Reconciliation and Reconciliation Thunder, what are other services or initiatives or programs are available for people to learn more about these 94 calls to action about reconciliation?
I think that I would really recommend the Treaty Relations Commission of Manitoba for those who are listening from Manitoba. It's really, really important to understand what our treaty relation is. They have a great campaign called We Are All Treaty People, because we're all beneficiaries of the treaties. We're all descended of the nations, you know, that signed these nation-to-nation agreements. So the Treaty Relations Commission of Manitoba, for those who are in Saskatchewan, there's the Office of the Treaty Commissioner, does the same thing. But we also, there's also plans in place potentially to have a national treaty commissioner across Canada. So that might be coming. That's something to watch out for. Also, the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation and the great work that they are doing. It's really important to follow them. And if you are for the corporate sector, there's Indigenous corporate training. Look at what Bob Joseph is doing. Great work, great articles, great blogs. And if you are an organization that really wants to follow through with these 94 calls to action and to make a public declaration that you are doing so, Winnipeg has an Indigenous Accord, and it's voluntary. You can jump in, you can sign up, you can make, you can just, you know, as an organization, you could make a declaration that you're going to follow such and such call to action and then report on it annually. So those are some that I would recommend. I don't know, Raymond or Grace, if you have more.
I can recommend no books. I can recommend that you visit some of these communities and maybe try and spend a week or two in them and see how well a person can survive it up there, because there are no hotels for you, there are no restaurants for you. The food prices are ridiculous. So and a lot of the people that live in these northern communities, especially the flying communities, the food prices, jobs, of course, is their major concern. So reconciliation is something that's really last on their list. Survival is number one. So I think that if anybody is really serious about helping Indigenous people, I would say visit these communities and spend a week or two there, learn the community, what's dynamics, what the word would be, and see how these people live, you know, and start there. Because if you're just gonna stay in Winnipeg in your own bubble and assume that you know what's happening in those communities just by reading whatever somebody else writes, you're not gonna know the real struggles of the people.
Meeting people can go a long way, because you humanize them. Then you see that they are an individual, whatever their life story, whatever they're going through, you can then relate to it and empathize with them, because otherwise it's just a story on the media.
We're creating partnerships with First Nations where half of our 10 meetings would be on First Nations and half would be in an adjoining town. For example, half at Roseau River First Anishinaabe First Nation and half in Altona, so that there's a link between the Indigenous and non-Indigenous. We're also hoping to organize visits to the National Indian Residential School Museum in Portage la Prairie. It's one of two in Canada, and our participants, we think, should visit the museum and get a real hands-on sense of the history of residential schools. So we're going to be encouraging that. And I'm very impressed with Cindy Blackstock. And, you know, at a conference back in 2015 in Winnipeg, she said, now that we know so much, why don't we do better? You know, I mean, that's really the call to action, isn't it? That there was a national survey of the attitudes of non-Indigenous people toward Indigenous people done by Environics Institute. And they classified people according to two characteristics. How much do you know and how much do you care? People who know a lot about our history in relationship to Indigenous people and really care about improving the situation formed about 18% of the population. But those who didn't know much and couldn't care less were 21%. And then there was a whole bunch who cared but didn't know much. And those are the ones we really want to capture. They care, and there's more and more Canadians who care. Reconciliation efforts are really mobilizing a lot. You know, when we appeared on CBC talking about our circles, there were 110,000 Facebook hits from that one program. And the message that came across was, I want to get involved in reconciliation. I don't know how. I'm afraid of making a mistake, and your project looks like a good solution. So it's the people who care but don't know much that we really need to focus on, so that we get this momentum and these calls to action which are acted on.
Well, this was a great conversation. I felt I learned a lot, and there's still more conversations to have. But where can people find out more information about these two organizations?
Our websites, both of the websites, are very easily accessible. circles4reconciliation.ca. All one word, circles4reconciliation.ca. And Jimmy, yours is?
Yeah, reconciliationthunder.org. Word reconciliation, thunder.org.
So I'm Susan Smitten. I'm the executive director of Raven. Our technical name is Raven, not Raven Trust, but everyone calls us that because that's our website, because we couldn't get Raven when we were trying to set it up. But our official name is Raven, which actually stands for Respecting Aboriginal Values and Environmental Needs. So we're the only charity with non-profitable charitable status in Canada that raises legal defense funds for Indigenous nations who choose to pursue defense of their rights and their title in order to protect their lands, waters, air, by going to the courts. So that's what we do. We are basically, none of us are lawyers. We're fundraisers and communicators and storytellers, and we raise legal defense funds.
I just think it's so cool that Raven, not only is it helping, Indigenous communities and First Nations get some of those legal rights to, fight for their rights, but it's also helping bring awareness to these issues. I like to consider myself a progressive person, but I don't know everything that's going on. So hearing about the work that Raven is doing, at least for me, is a great way to stay informed. We talked a lot last time, but how about we just go into what are some of the things Raven is helping fight right now?
Sure. Oh, lots. And we're busy, sadly. That's kind of the sad thing, but yes. So we are running many, many campaigns. We are supporting, and top of list and top of mind are some ones that are active right now. Beaver Lake Cree Nation is, we've been supporting them for 12 years, amazingly. They are about to go to court November 4th for a Supreme Court of Canada hearing to fight to get their advanced cost order, which is a special legal tool that is given in order to help even out the because they're suing Canada and Alberta to stop the expansion of the tar sands into their traditional territories. So while that trial is, inching its way towards an actual trial date, they went and asked for this advance cost order and they got it. But then the appeal court quashed it, overturned it completely, because they said, no, well, yeah, it's in the national interest and it is epic and novel, that's the word, for the courts. But we're not entirely sure you're broke because, hey, you've got a water truck you can drive around, so you must have money, which is so horrible. So anyway, so they're going to the Supreme Court on November 4th to try and get that advance cost order overturned, not just for themselves, but because in making that judgment, the appeal court narrowed the test on getting an advance cost order to the point where pretty much no nation in the country would ever be able to squeak through the little hole that they left as a standard. So that's a really important hearing. And then hopefully it will be reversed or changed back so that we can then support the nation for their actual trial, which is, I think, 2024 is the trial date. And that's huge because that's basically going to, for the first time in Canadian history, sort of separate from the Blueberry River case, which we weren't involved in, but it's a cumulative impact case. But this is going to really force industry to change how it does business on the ground. So that's one. We're supporting Heiltsuk Nation because they are still 5 years out from the spill of that the Nathan E. Stewart caused when it ran aground on their clam beds, shutting down their $100,000 a year commercial fishery and almost bankrupting the community. And so they are now running their own environmental impact assessment, and we're raising the funds for that, and all that information will be used in their litigation because they're suing BC and Kirby, which is the oil company out of Texas, and Canada. So imagine that. You've got to sue a Texas oil company, BC, and Canada. That's awesome. Yep. So I know, right? No problem. We'll just do that. Then we also have there's so many. I never know where to start. We have Salmon Nation. So we've been supporting Tla'amin and Hamalko nations because they're trying to step in. DFO, Department of Fisheries and Oceans, shut down the farming salmon farms on Discovery Islands, and now the corporations are trying to have that overturned, and so we're supporting them to go in and hopefully intervene on that. We have the Secwepemc title action. Secwepemc Nation is got a huge case that they're building around title to their traditional territories. We have why am I blanking? Oh, Wet'suwet'en. We're still waiting on the Wet'suwet'en. It's before the court, so we're waiting on judgments there. Yes, there's a lot. We got a lot going on, and we have 3 new ones that I can't tell you about.
Yeah, I gotta keep it tight wrap.
But there's a massive legal action that's coming for BC. BC Nation is launching that will really see if there's any teeth in DRIPA, the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act that BC launched. And we have 2 big litigation campaigns that we're running in Ontario, starting, we've been sort of behind the scenes fundraising, but we hope to launch those in November, December.
There is a ton that's going on. And like you mentioned, it's so unfortunate that you have to fight tooth and nail for things that should just be accessible to people like these communities. But in my opinion, I believe governments prioritize corporations, unfortunately.
Well, our whole raison d'etre is to make sure that nations that decide they're willing to access a colonial court system have the opportunity to get there and see it all the way through to the end. So that's what we're here for. And it is, challenging because you're working with a patriarchal colonial system. However, once you're inside it, the precedents and the decisions that the nations are standing for have an opportunity, you know, our legal change really is that there is this opportunity to carve out the crown sovereignty and remake our legal system from the inside out by setting better and better law, better legal precedents. I mean, a lot of people would still say, well, there have been hundreds of legal precedents set and governments aren't honoring them or acting on them. But at a certain point, you know, the tide has to turn. So we're optimistic.
I mean, it is slow progress, but there is progress being made. And, you know, as we're like with the 215 that we saw back in June, I feel people are starting to be like, oh yeah, maybe we should be paying attention, not just pushing it back, especially specifically for individuals of like colonizer background or like the colonizer backgrounds or immigrants, just kind of keeping informed. Because for myself, like you hear about, like in school, you hear about all like the reservations and the atrocities that were committed on our Indigenous people, but it's just kind of like a thing brushed over, like, oh, here's a thing that happened, don't think about it. And you're like, what? But why shouldn't we be talking or thinking about this?
So another thing that Raven has, it's brand new. Ryan, you're going to be almost first in on this. So brand new. And it's, we hope to have it launched in early 2022. It's being created and built right now. It is a brand new 10 module educational piece, because Raven does have a mandate to provide education around available legal rights and remedies as it pertains to law. So we've taken that and we've created what we're calling Home on Native Land. Mm-hmm. And it's sort of, you mentioned earlier that you wish, you know, you're this guy and there's all this information and you wish you knew how to have the conversations and how to access it. So that's what this is sort of designed for. However, what we've just done through the research is to build it around humor, because some of these conversations are hard to have. Mm-hmm. And so Ryan McMahon, the Anishinaabe stand-up comedian, is the host of this series, and he's interviewing amazing, brilliant legal minds from John Burroughs, Terry Lynn Williams-Davidson, Pam Palmater, Val Napoleon, Jeff Corntassel, all these, about very specific topics that deal with issues of Aboriginal law, which is the Canadian colonial kind of law, and Indigenous laws that pre-existed all of us, and the intersect of those, and how that ties to issues around land back, reconciliation, and all of those big, juicy, chewy topics that kind of hard to have conversations sometimes around the Thanksgiving table or the Christmas table or even just the breakfast table. And this, hopefully, with a video and then pedagogically designed materials to support this interview conversation, and then a little challenge at the end of each module. We want to give people the materials that they need to be able to at least start having these conversations, feel like they're not talking from the outside in, but actually have a sense of why this is important and why we're doing what we do, and the impact that they could have if they got engaged. And so there you go.
Yeah, you're right. These conversations are incredibly difficult to have sometimes, and sometimes they can get very heated around a kitchen table. But yeah, comedy is the perfect tool to deal with things like this and start those conversations. It just helps kind of creep in, go through some of the barriers that people get up, and then you can start having good conversations that come with solutions.
Yes. Yeah, and it's really great. Ryan has the perfect edge on this, and you know, there's some fabulous conversations about things like, honestly, doctrine of discovery. Okay, a little bit of a snore, right? Some people are like doctrine of discovery. I mean, it's serious and it's important and it's kind of nasty, but he's found a funny way to at least start that conversation. The Indian Act, oh my gosh, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you could talk on that one for a long time, but he has this great conversation with Val Napoleon about the Indian Act. And he says, how would you define the Indian Act? She's like, an interruption. So, there are some wonderful moments, but it also, there's a bit of you feel the to it and think, okay, I need to hear this and I need to know more. And that's what we're wanting out of Home on Native Land. So that's another big thing that we're working on.
That's awesome. So is there kind of a timeline that we can expect to see this?
Yeah, well, and it will live on the Raven website, and it will be the kind of thing where people can independently make their way through the 10 modules. We're optimistic. It's being built right now. So we really hope that we'll have it up and ready for the public. I don't want to say January 2022 too confidently, but hopefully by the end of January.
Yeah, kind of like end of January, that kind of Q1 kind of time frame.
Definitely. Well, it will for sure be out in the first quarter of 2022.
Oh, that's so exciting. I'm excited to check that out. That sounds like so much fun.
Yeah.
Awesome. And I mean, not only are there's all these legal actions going down, there was a festival Afloat. That's as I saw all over the Raven's social media. What can you tell me about that?
So that is the brainchild of our communications director, Andrea Palfreman. And it really is necessity is the mother of invention child, because with COVID, a lot of the beautiful momentum building fundraising that we often do was curtailed, not possible, not safe. And so Andrea lives on Salt Spring Island and had this great idea Luke Wallace is a wonderful performer and a friend to Raven. And so she said, well, what if all the friends that we have who are kayakers and paddlers and boaters just gathered around the dock? And Luke said, yeah, sure, I'd love to do that. So he went out on the dock and he performed one night and everyone came and there was this beautiful energy and everyone had fun, but they were safe because, in a boat, you can't get too close, plus you're outside. So then we just decided to take it larger. And so we had 6 concerts this past summer, 2 on Salt Spring, 1 in Vancouver, 1 in Montreal, 2 in Victoria. And now there are all kinds of people who have stepped forward saying, I want to have one. I want to have one in, Muskoka in Ontario. People want to have them in Northern BC. So next year we will have the festival afloat again. And we raised, it was really phenomenal. Over all the concerts, we raised about $80,000.
Awesome.
And so those were for 3 of our campaigns, Heiltsuk, Wet'suwet'en, and West Moberly. That was another one I forgot to mention in that first long list, but West Moberly First Nation, of course, is litigating to stop the Site C dam. So, and that's a huge one for us as well. So those concerts will commence again next year. We're super excited about it. And if anybody wants to host a concert, we have a whole package of information that we can send to people to help them have a successful concert. Plus, now that it's been modeled a few times, we've learned a few things, and there's lots of tips that we can give to people in terms of making it safe. I think the concert in Montreal was actually on land. They ended up not being able to get the water permit that they needed, but it ended up just was super fine. It didn't matter. So it can be a festival afloat that's dry docked if they want. But the idea is that people can gather outdoors safely and also feel what it is to be part of a movement, which is also super important when you're wanting to do this kind of work. There
was a couple of walks that took place in Winnipeg with the 215 Every Child Matters, and I went to them, and you could really feel that energy, everyone coming together, and it is just so great seeing people coming together, fighting for equality for everyone. That's at the end of the day, I believe that is what people want, just everyone to be happy and healthy.
If anybody wants to, I kind of cut myself off with it, but if anyone wants to host a festival afloat, they can email either info@raventrust.com or just email Andrea directly, Andrea@raventrust.com, and we'll send out all the information they need.
And hopefully we can see some more of those pop up over the coming spring and summer.
Be a perfect place for a festival, right?
Exactly. So not only is Raven involved in helping raise funds for legal action, bringing awareness, and part of that awareness is through the podcast. I've listened to a couple episodes, and it is some really great stuff. When someone is listening, what episodes should they be looking out for, and what can people expect coming down the pipeline?
Well, honestly, I think they're all good to listen to. There were some great ones that we did as sort of towards the end of season 2 with different Indigenous knowledge keepers. Jess Housty with Healthsick First Nation. I don't have the list in front of me, so I shouldn't do that. I'll get myself lost. But with Shukputmak Elder, Healthsick Elders, with Jeff Horntassel, I believe, John Boros. So there's just really interesting series there. But for season 3, we're taking it a little different. Mm-hmm. We've just we brought on a fabulous new communication specialist to work on our comms team, Jamie Lee Gonzalez. She's Squamish Portuguese ancestry, and she is going to work with Andrea to do a season that's co-hosted. Where before we had it just I was hosting it. So Andrea and Jamie Lee are going to co-host and be bringing in different experts to talk about a whole new range of topics and sort of have it be a bit more of a chat, a bit more of a less interview style and more interactive and live. Mm-hmm. So that will be coming soon. Jamie Lee just started with us, so I don't want to tell you when season 3 will be up and live, but we'll certainly launch it and everyone will be able to find out more about it. We also host all of the podcasts on our website too, so people can always find them. So yeah, so that's coming, and we're pretty excited about that because as podcasts, we did all right. To be honest, it was our first foray into the land of podcasts, and so we were happy with how it went. But I think our sense is that if we just change the format and bring in some different voices, we can hopefully expand the listener.
Yeah, that's the thing about podcasts. You're not. Sometimes things like just hit really well. Sometimes it's kind of just you're like, okay, how could I adjust this? And I mean, we're in the same boat. We're kind of learning this whole environment, figuring out what for myself, what I can do, who could I talk to. Yeah, it's exciting. Podcasts are so much fun. It's a great way to get a lot of information to a listener as they're just going to the grocery store or driving to work.
Doing the house cleaning. That's what I listen to mine. Really, the vacuum or the podcast? I'm listening to the podcast. So yeah, I know. So anyway, that is coming.
That's so exciting. So much awesome stuff on the way.
Yeah. Yes. 2022 is already shaping up to be a massive year for us.
That's great. That's fantastic. I'm excited for Raven.
Thank you. Yeah. So are we. So yeah, and and I actually meant to mention, I talked to you about it earlier, but in terms of the Healthsick campaign, we're doing more webinars. So we actually are partnering with people about different webinars. We had a webinar recently that we did with Dogwood, and now we're doing this, it's part of Reconciling Ways of Knowing. And this is going to be a webinar called Stewarding Our Marine Relations. And it's sort of connected to our Healthsick fundraising. And so it's happening on Tuesday, October 26th at 10 a.m. Pacific, 11 Central, 1 o'clock Atlantic. It's about an hour and a half. And the moderator is Saul Brown, who, if people don't know Saul, he is an amazing Helsuk and Nuchalnath, a researcher on marine stewardship and governance. And he's also going through the UVic joint Indigenous law program. So he'll eventually be a lawyer. And he's facilitating this huge conversation with Nang Jingwas Russ Jones, who's a marine scientist that's with Haida, I believe, and also Dr. Teresa Ryan, a Shimshan marine scientist, and Dr. Ann Solomon, a marine ecologist and professor at SFU, Simon Fraser University. So it's going to be this amazing conversation with these brilliant minds around marine ecology, because I think what people don't realize, you know, when the Nathan E. Stewart spilled 110,000 liters of diesel. Mm-hmm. And they have these huge tides. And so, of course, Kirby was trying to put up these ridiculous booms and trying to control the spill, but with tides that are 3 meters and the amount of water that moves and super quickly, it just got flushed through the narrow channels that are all the inlets between all of the many islands that make up the area in the Great Bear Sea. And the clams and all of the other invertebrates, plus the fish, abalone, everything in the area were soaked, saturated in diesel because the tide went out and it all sank into the spill. Well, they haven't recovered. You know, it's not something that just gets flushed through and flushed out and then everything is okay again. That's not what happens. Here's the challenge, though. What does happen? Nobody really knows. And so 5 years later, they're still having to monitor it because this has never been done. Environmental impact assessments of this scope and scale haven't been done ever in Canadian history. And so they're having to build the templates and create the science and then monitor. And it will be for the benefit of everyone in the country because, let's face it, we have a rather large coastline. And this kind of information, this kind of science and the data that will come from this will actually help people understand, because these spills happen all the time. People don't know, but and they get covered up or actually reports it, but these spills are causing damage. And so it's really important to understand the marine ecology and what's at stake. And the Helsuk in their legal action are actually going for something super precedent setting, which is that title to land, actually, when nations get title, it's only to where the water meets the land. They're actually going for title to the foreshore, because those clams have been their sustenance over the years. Instead of farming wheat, they farm clams. Well, they need to have title to that area. So that's also what they're going for. And this marine ecology will actually help support their litigation as well. So it's really important.
Yeah, it's super exciting stuff, being aware of our marine life and ecosystem. One of the things in terms of sustainable land and feeding the whole earth, one of the things is vertical farms out in the oceans. And if we're polluting our oceans, well, that we're just polluting the potential food that we can have. And if our oceans and ecosystems are healthy, like, everything is great, as we're seeing with the United Nations reports on climate change. We're kind of in a danger zone right now, and we need to respect our oceans. And it's not just oil spills or gas spills. It's microplastics, the acidity of the oceans. These are all things we need to be aware of, and this is a great way to set precedent and people becoming aware and getting more involved.
Yeah, it's true. I was just up in Bella Bella for this festival that we were supporting and around salmon. And one of the issues that the salmon have gone in that area have gone from runs of 70,000 to 700. It's been decimated. So the impact, however, is massive on an ecosystem. With the salmon fail, the grizzlies are now hungry. So the grizzlies and the bears are starting to forage in community. So 4 bears in the community had to be shot the week we were there because they're coming into town because they're starving. The eagles are affected, all of the other life to see the trickle down, you don't, the prices are one thing, for consumers, but really the massive impact on the entire ecological infrastructure is something that's everyone needs to turn their mind to, because you're right, it's climate change, it's forestry practices, it's fishing practices, it's all of these things. They're all interconnected, and as we are all connected, and we are all connected to every animate and inanimate object on the planet, these things affect us eventually as well. So
Yeah.
it is for all of us. If Crystal Lehman of Beaver Lake Cree Nation said once, if you drink water or you breathe air, this is about you.
Money isn't going to help you at the end of the day when all our forests are gone and our oceans are just pure sludge.
Right. And our lakes are polluted and the animals are poisoned. I mean, it will eventually.
It's just that mindset of, I understand. Like, I started collecting hats. Like, consumerism, it's addicting. It is addicting. But, we got to start focusing more on, like, environmental aspects. And, it's not just on the individual, like everyone tries pushing. This is a thing we need to challenge our governments and corporations on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%.
More awareness around Indigenous peoples. There was National Truth and Reconciliation Day on September 30th. What is your thoughts on this, and just Raven's thoughts on a day like this?
It's important, and I'm so glad that we have this. I would also say that it's, from our perspective, it's a really important day of reflection, mm-hmm. because it's great to have the day off, but if the day isn't used in service of the point of reconciliation, then it's a missed opportunity. It's actually an affront. And so we sent out an email to people. It was kind of amusing because the grammarians of the crowd sort of missed the point, because what we wrote was an email called "Reconciliation is a Verb," mm-hmm. which, if you read the whole email, you would actually understand. It's a bit like love is a verb. It's something that has to be acted. It's in the doing that it becomes meaningful. And so our idea is that, the concept of reconciliation is wonderful, but if it's only a concept, it's useless. And the phrase, by many nations, don't even like the phrase reconciliation anymore, because it's been co-opted by politicians who use it to just continue enacting a colonial agenda. There was this stunning act of colonial violence just 3 days before the Reconciliation Day, where the Wet'suwet'en ancestral village site was razed by Coastal GasLink in order to put through the fracked gas pipeline, even though the project doesn't have free, prior, and informed consent of the nation. So There you go. 3 days prior to something that we're supposed to be all working towards. So, before we can actually speak about reconciliation or healing or right relationship, all the violence against Indigenous peoples and their lands has to stop. Mm-hmm. Just has to. And so I think for us, we were trying to encourage people to take the day to put energy and resources towards real redress, real reparation.
Yeah.
So that's sort of where we came from on it. I think that there, and it's, so some people might say, well, how do you do that? It's like, well, seek out some of the minds that are of it. There are so many passionate people working towards this. Murray Sinclair, Pam Pomater, Saul Brown, who I mentioned earlier, Bruce McIver, a lawyer based in Vancouver, runs First Peoples Law, has a massive blog that people could go and do all kinds of fantastic reading. There's so many ways to start turning your mind to the issues and how you can internalize them, take it off the page and make it real, and start putting principles into practice. That's, I guess, what we would really encourage people to do.
I know I spent a lot of the day watching docuseries on Indigenous struggles and issues, and the more I learn, the more I want to get involved. And us at U Multicultural, we're continuing to try and reach out to people to start new series and share stories. I mean, it can be a challenge sometimes because, you know, there is a distrust of colonizers. So it can be really hard to be like, well, we want to be an ally. I understand some of your hesitations. But yeah, it felt a little bit like the government giving itself a gold star, kind of like, oh, look, we did a good thing, like a paid day off for government employees. But, you know, maybe it should be a day where government focuses on finding solutions.
Yes.
But,
well, and here's an idea, because it's currently just a federal holiday. But for businesses, you know, generally every year businesses will allot a certain number of stats that they give to their employees. So maybe it should be a flexible thing, so that if employees want to take Truth and Reconciliation Day as a stat holiday, maybe they don't take Thanksgiving.
yeah, that's another thing that I felt a little weird this year, visiting family for Thanksgiving. It's like, this is a weird genocidal celebration kind of.
If it's a harvest celebration, that's one thing. But yeah, I mean, you know, you could talk for hours about how horrible, you know, the whole colonial thing, like Columbus, et cetera, forget it. But my point is that would be one way of turning it into something really meaningful. One of a donor that has been a fairly significant donor to a couple of our campaigns emailed and said, look, we're not closing. However, I want to present at lunch, having all the staff come into the lunchroom, and we're going to have a presentation, and we're going to talk about this and have some resources and encourage people to make donations to causes. So they turned it into an active lunch and learn. So, you know, there's lots of ways to really make it real.
Yeah, make it a day of action, not just performative.
Right. That's why we said reconciliation is a verb. All the grammarians out there, we're sticking with it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you so much for taking this time to chat with me. It's always fantastic to hear about the amazing things that's going on at Raven. There's some really fun stuff coming down in the future. And just once again, if there's anything else that you'd like to share, now would be a great opportunity. And where can people find out more information about Raven?
First of all, I just want to say thank you, Ryan. I always love our conversations. I'm starting to feel like this is a thing. And I would just say that if anybody wants to know more about Raven, our website is one of the best ways. It's updated regularly and it's fairly fresh. So that's raventrust.com, which is where everybody gets the idea that that's our name. We also have an amazing digital platform. Carissa Chandrakate, our digital content coordinator, is a rock star. And so on Instagram and on Facebook and on Twitter, you can find all kinds of information and different kinds of posts there. So I would encourage people to follow us there. And yeah, I guess that's it. We don't, there's really, I've already told you about the webinar that's coming up on the 26th. If people, that will be on our website. If people want to know how to sign up for that, I think they should go to the website. Yeah, so that's going to be called Stewarding Our Marine Relations on Tuesday, October 26th at 10 o'clock Pacific. And other than that, we have just that Home on Native Land coming. So stay tuned. Pretty soon that'll be out. Yeah, so it's just great. I really loved this conversation, and I hope if anybody ever has any questions for us about the campaigns, they would just get in touch, give us a call at the office, or send us an email at info@raventrust.com. We really encourage conversation and dialogue.
Enjoying the content from U Multicultural? Why not check out our website where we have more fantastic content like this. Head to u-channel.ca. I'm Ryan Funk. This was U Talk. and have yourself a good one.